Peace, peace, peace to the family. We live. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and waiting. Sorry for the delay. We're gonna jump into it, but before we get to the business, I want to say Madupe to brother Kofi and Satel, brother Ben, and the whole Mossi Warrior clan, brother Ankh, everybody that has been influential in helping us liberate the African mind and in this thing, man. I know this weekend has been really busy. We had some powerful presentations by both of our brothers and our teachers or sabers, Sar and brother Ben, Black Panther. Um, if you haven't got a chance to check those out, please do. We got Kofi coming up tomorrow on Kofi Pie Side TV, I believe. And look forward to that tomorrow evening. We all gonna be on that building. And right now I'm gonna turn it over to the brothers, man. If they got anything they want to say before we jump into it.
Yeah, I want to say Black African power was good, was happening. Well organized lie defeats a disorganized truth every time. Ooh, we. Oh, I've been wanting to do that for the longest, man. Everybody that follow Big Brother Uncle Cat, that's what he say every time he go live. But I just want to say Madupe and Moriri to everybody out there in the chat and those that may be joining later on. I just want to say we appreciate you for tuning in and watching the show, because y'all could be doing anything else with y'all time. So I just always want to show my appreciation, or we always want to show my appreciation. I just want to say also I want to say Igun Majube Iba Igun Kiki Igungun. I always want to give honor and praises to the ancestors, because we wouldn't be here without the ancestors. Literally. Also, Fatmu Alafie, Fatmu Iwa Pele. We want to try to keep good character and bring forth peace into the chat. That's all I got, man.
All right, so
peace to the chat. Appreciate everybody watching. Really looking forward to this presentation. It's gonna be real good. I know that boy Shawn be coming with it, so I want to say Madupe as well. Iwa Pele, all that stuff. I've been wanting to say that. How you've been wanting to say that? I've been wanting to say that. But yeah, y'all, enjoy the show, man.
All right, I know it's a little delay with people coming in, but peace Jadar, unique pieces, strong arm. What's up, man? What's good? Cujo, good looking, bro. I know you lingering around. You've been waiting on the show for a minute now. And to everybody else who may catch the show or come in late, peace to you guys for tuning in, liking the show, sharing the show, or thumbing the show down. The reason behind this particular presentation is because we have had an opportunity to kind of weed through some claims throughout history and throughout past. And in this particular presentation, we will deal with a claim or two or three from the past, and I'll get more specific in that in detail in the presentation. But I just want to, put people up on a situation that actually has transpired. Now, this is not the only situation that has taken place. There have been others who have been victimized by the kidnapping trade of our ancestors and brought over here against their will. So if I can do this without closing it out. Oh, I already got it open. Let's get to rocking, man. Like I said, like the show, share the show. We know it's will be some stragglers coming in because we didn't jump right straight in after the other show. So let's get it in.
The story of Abad el-Rahman
Ibrahima, a Muslim slave who in 1807 was recognized by an Irish ship surgeon as the son of an African king who had saved his life many years earlier. The prince, as he had become known to local Natchez, Mississippi residents, had been captured in war when he was 26 years old, sold to slave traders, and shipped to America. Slave though he was, Ibrahim was educated, aristocratic man, and he was made overseer of a large cotton and tobacco plantation of his master, who refused to sell him to the doctor for any price. The colonization effort was the vehicle for the repatriation of one man who would become Mississippi's most famous slave, Prince Abdul Rahman Ibrahima, whose efforts to return to Africa became a cause of celebrity during the 19th century. Now, that's exactly how they wrote celebrity, by this particular source. Now, Ibrahima's story was chronicled in numerous newspaper accounts and books in the early 19th century, and in a later book by Terry Alford. Ibrahima was a West African prince who had been sold into slavery at the age of 26 in 1788. After his army was defeated in battle, he was subsequently transported to the United States and eventually found himself a Foster Mound plantation near Natchez, struggling to convince his owners and anyone else who would listen that he was a nobleman. He was said to have promised Thomas Foster, who had bought him, a ransom of gold in exchange for his freedom, but Foster had scoffed at the offer. Few of the immigrants to Liberia shared the sort of notoriety enjoyed but his immigration brought attention to the repatriation effort. During the height of the colonization between 1820 and 1870, the American Colonization Society sent an estimated 13,000 immigrants to the colony, the majority of whom were sponsored by societies in Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Mississippi, New York, Pennsylvania, and Virginia. Let's go to war. The year was 1781. Ibrahim, under the command of his uncle Sulamina, set out against a Bambara army of 5,000 or 6,000. But Sulamina was killed in the first fighting, and the inexperienced Ibrahim found himself in charge. Naturally, the army doubted he could lead it into anything happy and prepared to return home with or without him in a spacious first command for a son of the Alamami. Ibrahim persuaded the soldiers at last to remain 3 days and put him to a test. The Bambara war leader agreed to an armistice of equal length, Ibrahim having convinced him that he wanted to send to his father for the terms of which he might surrender. Ibrahim took the time to move his army back and open a path into a great can thicket. The road was about 1/3 of a mile long. In the middle of the cane, he had a field cleared large enough to contain the Bambara army. The trap was set in 72 hours. To the surprise of the Bambara, the morning of the 4th day found Ibrahim demanding they make an appearance and fight. Angered by his duplicity, they attacked. Ibrahim withdrew by design, reaching the cane and retreating with his men along the narrow road they had cut. The Bambara followed, anticipating an easy victory, but Ibrahim, reaching the center field, led his men onto a second exit that had been built. When the Bambara reached the middle of the thicket, they found Ibrahim blocking one road out of his cavalry, following their heels up the other. The cane was so thick it offered no other exits. To commence a terrible destruction, wrote a friend to whom Ibrahim gave the story. The cane was set on fire. Those who attempted to escape were put to the sword. Those who remained were destroyed by the flames. Nearly the entire army was exterminated. Among the survivors was the dazed Bambara war leader. He was found sitting on the ground, surrendered by a few of his followers. Ibrahim berated him for attacking the Fulbi, which is the Fulani, frontier, asked what punishment he deserved. "I must die," said the old warrior, who looking up and seeing how young Ibrahim was, added, "And I rejoice. I have been defeated by a boy." His wish was granted. A broadsword took off his head. The year 1781 came to a portentous close. A one-eyed Irishman named John Cox, surgeon of a ship on the coast, went ashore to hunt and became separated from his companions. When he could not be found, they sailed without him. Learning this, Dr. Cox began to wander inland. "Our people saw him," Ibrahim wrote, "and ran and told my father that they saw a white man. Since no such creature had been known before the Futa, Sori ordered him brought to the Timbo. Dr. Cox arrived ill and exhausted. One account stated he had been found lying face down on the ground, horribly bitten by insects. One leg was nearly lame from the bite of a poisonous worm." Future travelers would tell of the intense interest the Fulbi took in them. Brian O'Byrne wrote that they almost got their eyelashes tangled with his in their efforts to examine him. Theodore Cannot reported that the press of the spectators day and night became a kind of hell. He needed guards just to walk. Mungo Park, which is we'll get into him some other time down the line, was assured he had been dipped in milk when born, while Fulbi rubbed his eyes in disbelief at the Gaspard Molian and asked if he had a mother at all, speculating he had come from the bottom of the sea, being the first white man who had ever been there. Gallaudet wrote, "Dr. Cox was a great curiosity." Now, in the account of Dr. Cox by the Fulani, they recognize that they've never really truly seen a white man. Somebody may have seen a resemblance of one before, but this was on a whole nother level. Now, Mungo Park is what they want to call a European. He is a so-called researcher and traveler. He does all these things in Africa, but he labels Africans with all these derogatory terms, and he used them for examples in like the museum thing. But that's for another day. They brought Dr. Cox, Ibrahima continued, and my father asked him whether he was going. He said he knew not where to go, that the ship had left and that he had a bad sore leg. My father told him he had better go no farther, but stay with him and he would get a woman to cure the leg. My father told him to stay as long as he chose. So the surah, like he says, sent help. This help came from the medicine that they had in the village. The village would, let's see, if it helped heal him, cure him, or whatever. Sora proved as kind as his words. He gave the doctor a house and a nurse, and Dr. Cox recovered enough in a few months to go horseback riding. Ibrahima became an intimate, passionate time with him and learning a bit of English. Dr. Cox is probably the person whom the traveler Molion writing in 1820 mentions as taking a wife and fathering a son in Timbo. According to the historian Andre Arson, whose History de la Rennie Francas in 1911 is still a landmark work of Futa in many respects, that the wife would have been Ibrahima's sister. The story is credible, easygoing by nature. Dr. Cox was a warm and impulse man, a rationalist on religion. He would have, though, Islam no worse than Christianity, and in his position as unpaying guest, he had considerable incentive to be agreeable. As for the Fulbe, this was the beginning of the long friendship with whites. No traveler was ever to be killed in these plateaus, and indeed, when another visitor fell sick there 50 years later, one of Ibrahim's brothers was greatly upset, for if any accident happened, the character of Timbo might be ruined, and he should never die again, he feared. See another white stranger. Dr. Cox would bid farewell to Sora and Ibrahima, returning back to the coast, hoping to return back home. Sora would also send some help to see Dr. Cox off only if a ship was available to take him back home. Sora gave specific orders to his men to not go on board any ship and to keep an eye out for possible enslavers. Dr. Cox was so fortunate to find the same vessel from which he had become separated. Soon he set sail. In the years that followed the doctor's departure, Ibrahima married, and in 1786 he had a son named Al-Hussein. This child, unlike his father, was born in the country at peace. Laws were respected once more. Trade was flourishing, herds were thriving. Futa was secure and no longer threatened by its neighbors. Generations would come and go before it knew another invasion of consequence. Sura took pride in the restitution of order, and so it seemed appropriate, at least to him, to build for himself and his family 10 fine houses on the summit of the great fortification he had erected at Timbo after the fire of 1763. In one of the houses near him lived the favorite son, Ibrahim, which means Abraham. In 1787, Sora for years fought to secure a route to the sea, but constantly had to fight for the Susu king to establish control. Rather war diplomacy, Sora tried to seek control to secure trade routes for his people. Because of the Susu and its inability to follow suit to the route became too dangerous for trade, and Sora would have to address his neighbors once more. In 1788, around January, when Fulbe traded parties set out for the Rio Pangas in peaceful times, a Fulbe army of 2,000, including 350 horsemen, left the plateaus. Ibrahima was in command. I was made a captain when I was 21, he wrote later. After they put me to that and found that I had a very good head, at 24, they made me a colonel. At the age of 26, they sent me to fight the Hebos because they destroyed the vessel that came to the coast and prevented our trade. The Hebos have not been identified, but they were a non-Muslim people, evidently hostile to the Fulbe. Enough refugees from the Futa lived in the basin of the Rio Pangas for another to wonder if Hebo is simply corrupted from a Pular word Habi, by which the Fulbe designated strangers, slaves, or pagans in general.
Who's the Huba?
Huh?
Who is the Huba?
Man, we don't know who the Hubas are.
Oh, I thought you were making fun of something. I ain't gonna even call the group out, but I thought you were making fun of another group. Okay.
Advancing into the country, Ibrahima attacked and burned several towns. It was a surprisingly easy campaign. but Hebos refused to challenge him and scattered before his numbers. His father avenged Ibrahim and withdrew, sending the infantry home and bringing up the rear himself with 300 horse soldiers. But Ibrahim had underestimated his adversaries. They had fled to fight in a spot more to their liking. By moving rapidly along back trails, they managed to find hiding places in a narrow pass through which he would have to go. Peep this. We could not see them, Ibrahim wrote, and did not expect there was any enemy. The cavalry arrived at pass, dismounted, and led their horses up the mountainside. Halfway to the top of the devastating fire opened up on the horsemen. We saw the smoke, we heard the guns. We saw the people drop down, he wrote. A withering blast of bullets ran up and down the slope. Men dropping like rain was the image the scene brought to his mind. The air was filled with the shrieks of the wounded and the panic of the horses on the path. It was chaos. Ibrahim would never forget these minutes. I told everybody to run until we reached to the top of the hill, then away for each other until all came there, and we would fight them. Remounting, Ibrahim bolted to the summit, where he saw how bad the situation had become. Only he and his guard had reached the spot, and the Hebos pursued, firing at them. They followed us, and we ran and fought. I saw this would not do. I told everyone to run who wished to do so. Some fled, while others clustered around Ibrahim for a last resistance. The Hebo quickly surrounded them. I will not run from a Hebo, Ibrahim said. He jumped off his horse and sat down on the ground, holding his charger's bridle in one hand and a sword concealed beneath him in another. An arrow hit him in the back, but it glanced away, wounding him only slightly. Hebo soldier appeared before him, leveling a musket at him at point-blank range. Seeing Ibrahim's clothes and the ornaments, however, and realizing his rank, the man reversed his weapon, and others did likewise, a signal to each other and perhaps to Ibrahim too that his life would be spared. I had a sword, but they did not see it. The first one that came, I sprang forward and killed. It was the last act of his life as a warrior. A fun barrel cracked against the back of his head that was spun, and Ibrahim fell unconscious in the dirt. The next thing he remembered was being dragged from a pond. The Hebos had thrown him in to revive him. When he recovered enough to look around, he saw that almost his entire army had fallen prisoner. His clothes were stripped, his sandals taken, and his hands tied, probably with the stout ropes of the bamboo hoops of the country. Then he returned to embrace of the country he had just desolated. They made me go barefoot 100 miles, Ibrahim wrote, and led my horse before me. Sora would get word back at Tempo that his son had been captured and would immediately assemble at infantry. As he set his eyes on pursuing his son, the Hebos will constantly stay on the move. But Sora's concern were more on the presence of the Mandinka slates. These black merchants traveled great distances in the interior to buy prisoners of war and other goods to sell to Europeans. They were Muslim generally, people of influence and often great wealth. These slates from Gambia River were those who would set in motion the irremediable slide to a distant port, sell to a slave a shipment beyond the sea, and bondage of worse in a land from which no one returned. Ibrahim knew it, and he proposed great that exorbitant ransom for himself, including, he would later claim, 100 cattle, as many sheep as a man could drive, and as much gold as a man could carry. But the war had kindled feelings that were not to be quenched so easily. An English slave trader who dealt with the slates wrote on such subjects. If they are captured, they have been particularly active in wars. A king, prince, or their sons, no price can purchase them. It was also true that the Hebos refused to exchange him because they feared his vengeance. At length, he was sold to the Sletes, along with most of his army. By his own account, Ibrahim was exchanged for 2 flasks of powder, a few trade muskets, 8 hands of tobacco, and 2 bottles of rum. My father came and burnt the country, Ibrahim wrote, but the Slates had already begun moving their new property north. They crossed the rolling coastal hills and went down into Ngamba, the land of the hippopotamus, where pagan Mandinka lived in the area the fool be termed the Darul Harb, the land of war, of those who refused the faith. Ibrahim called it the wilderness, the sluggish, marshland Casamas lay to the north. In one generation, Ngamba would ring like a belfry under the blows of the Almami of Timbo, while near the Casmas a Phobe state would be erected with the help of Ibrahim's nephews and cousins. But in 1788, it was world's end, and Ibrahim was going across it. Robert Heatley was a coaster equally at home in London and Nyana Mari in the Mandinka kingdom of Lower Nyana. Fluent in Mandinka, Heatley had been in Gambia trade for 25 years by 1788 and had lived on the River Severn. He was intimate enough with the Mandinka to have witnessed their trials by ordeal of fire and water for witchcraft, a claim few Europeans could make. Long settled in trade, Heatley made 7 or 8 voyages with Africans from Gambia to the West Indies and South Carolina. Heatley had sailed ranging in burden from 90 to 250 tons, but he wished to own the perfect Gambia runner, one he would form, rig, and sail himself. When peace was proclaimed between Great Britain and the United States, he went to London and had a craft built at Shawn shipyards in 1784. He christened it and named it Africa, a 110-ton, 2-master brig fitted for a crew of 15. It was a clinker-built vessel whose hull planking overlapped in a lap-streak manner. Sheathed with copper, the Africa drew only 11 feet of water fully loaded, and when the wind beat into the leach of its square sails, it ran at a good speed for a brig. Well constructed, the slave returned. Captain Heatley, recruited for a voyage in 1787, did for Barnes what he had been unable to do for himself, selling the Africa to the Gambia. He found slaves abundant and cheap. As a war on the Senegal had diverted numerous slaves south, he slipped his cargo past the post on the Lower River, where a dispute had led to a seizure of 3 English vessels, and arrived in Dominica with 165 Africans, well ahead of the Liverpool traders. He returned to London on August 7, 1787, in ballast and success. In 1788, Heatley got the Africa ready for another voyage, and as the rain set over the coast, he drew a crew and got his ship assured by lords of London. Heatley gave way to John Nevin, a competent sailor and a friend of Barnett's. Nevin knew the Gambia well, and he knew it well enough he almost lost his life there. When he spent half a year at Nyani Maru waiting to buy slaves in 1784, 1/3 of his crew died. I was ill myself, Nevin stated, and think my life was preserved by bitters and bark. On January 30th in 1788, Captain Nevis set a sail of Africa for Gambia. The mouth of the river was usually reached in less than 30 days. After paying the customary toll at Jafar, it took another week to ride the tides upriver to Nyani Maru. The Africa reached this place about the first week in March. Nyani Maru was a Mandinka village of several hundred houses on the Gambia North Bank. A map of the period contains this inscription from Harry Gandy of Bristol. Nyani Maru is a delightful country abounding with provisions and inhabited with honest, hospitable people. Their houses are provided with the various kinds of household furniture, etc. This place had become wealthy through the taxing of caravans and the slave trading that had thrived since the 1600s. Mandinka cultivators and traders had resided here for centuries. They were all tall, slender people, black, active, and warlike. The Manso, or king, or Lower Nyani, of which Nyani Maru was the chief town, lived in a nearby town. The chieftain lived in a nearby town. With his permission, Heatley and 2 other Europeans maintained establishments during the slave, ivory wax, and a little gold. To Heatley's eyes, Ibrahima and the remnants of his war party appearing from the high lowlands south of Nyani Maru would have looked similar to the groups he had seen many times before. They come down in large bodies, tied together by the neck. He rode perhaps loaded and whipped along the same as the horse. With 50 of his command, Ibrahim was soon purchased by Captain Nevi. So he was captured, then he was sold once, and then he sold again. So he's been sold twice. He's been captured and sold twice. The nature of the slave service in West Indies being chiefly field labor, Barnes wrote at this time, requires for the immediate interest of the plants a great number of males. Nevis shopped accordingly. Ibrahima could see that for every 4 brought on the Africa, there were only 2 women and 1 child. The men were clamped in irons immediately. We should think it very dangerous otherwise, Heatley noted, and taken below.
Heatley said it was quite common for incoming captives not to understand each other and not to know the full extent of what was taking place. Ibrahima was fluent in Mandinka, knew precisely what was going on. While it did not lessen his alarm at his fate, it meant he knew what the fate was. The time passed when Dr. Cox had made him familiar with whites, and he was no doubt less afraid of them than were many other people in the interior. But of help there was none. Although there were Muslims in Lower Niani who might have been expected to save Ibrahim politically and cultural considerations by otherwise. And the Fulbe here, divided by dialect, caste, and religion, showed little intergroup feeling as well. Reserve, even hostility between them was common. There was nothing that Niani Maru for Ibrahim but the toad that pulled him on.
Bulkhead separated them from the boys of the main mast and pumps. Several dozen women were put afterward between the boys and the ship's square stern. In the boat to Ibrahim's front was the hospital, an isolation room for anyone developing fever. Precise figures are lacking, but it appears about 165 to 170 Africans were crowded below deck. Captain Nevis also stowed in 456 pounds of beeswax and 23 ivory tusks.
After a rapid loading, the Africa began downstream in mid-March. The bamboo and swamps of Niani were soon succeeded by mangrove thickets so impenetrable that the banks were hidden from view. Salt water was encountered 100 miles up the river Elephant Island, and the country became flatter and more mountainous each mile. Villages of cane huts alone appeared. At last, the ship came to the level lower river, where all the winding was rewarded. The Africa slipped past Barrow Point and spread its sails to the northeast trade winds, its prow pointed for the Windward Islands, more than 3,000 miles to the west.
Ibrahim was 66 when he told Gallaudet about the voyage. For 2 reasons, it seemed best at the time to suppress an account of it. Slave ships were so familiar to the people in 1828 that the biographer could say of Ibrahim's trip, it would be useless to describe its horrors, and everyone would know what he meant. In this way, it was asserted that Ibrahim underwent a passage as ordinary and as abominable as had 75,000 other Africans in 1788. Also, his biographer did not wish to arouse ill will toward slaveholders, and this was another reason to let the matter pass. And so no full account of these weeks was ever published. What is left rather disconcertingly is a few facts, a few hints, and a tradition. They are not what one wants, but they do give an idea of the passage.
For one thing, the Africa was very crowded. 170 people aboard a 110-ton brig meant there was less than a 1-ton burden for each slave. 2 tons were considered minimal by English reformers. If the average height of 5 feet in the twin decks applied, no one could stand up in the men's quarter, and those on the side platforms could not sit up from where they lay. One can imagine what it meant for the forward who were tall people. Ibrahim himself, 6 feet tall, was chained by the ankle to another passenger. His confinement was broken only for meals, and those were customarily served twice a day. It was also customary for the slaves to sing their country songs and dance about for exercise, males on the deck and females up on the quarter deck with the captain. As the Fulbe, who were Muslim, did not dance, perhaps Nevin's quirk was employed to get them moving. At any rate, Ibrahim was more impressed with Nevin's habit of having tea served at a table in the late afternoon. He could not have seen this unless he was situated near a graded hatch, which tells something important about the voyage. There was no first class and twin deck, just levels of hell such as Dante provides, but Ibrahim was at a hatch. He had a good position for fresh air and sea breezes and a better chance of surviving. It meant being the first out and the last in during musters, but the hours below are measured of the voyage. Despite the ports and gratings that Heatley had given to Africa, ventilation was poor, with partitions shutting the hold into breathless compartments that were hot during the day, cold at night. Human excrement raised as a stench that was fetid and noxious and killed appetites more effectively than seasickness. Nausea, weakness, and debility followed. From dysentery and guinea worms, a mortality of at least 5% was expected. Ibrahim's impression of the trip was that it seemed to go on and on and on. Tedious was the adjective Galileo used. Tedious is the 19th century sense of overlong and wearisome. Inevitable physical and mental deterioration resulted. The horrors he felt so deeply was the expression used to characterize the trip many years later. The prince's sufferings were very great.
Hey, Shawn.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I just want to let the family know, like what you just said about those slides. That slide there about the separating of the women, and they down above deck, the men above deck, they dancing and singing their favorite songs, and they're exercising. You can find some first-hand accounts by Alexander Falconbridge. If you look for the family, if you want to look more into that, Alexander Falconbridge was a medical physician who took numerous voyages on a lot of those slave ships to actually keep the our ancestors who were kidnapped, keep them healthy, as well as keep those the Europeans on deck healthy. So look up Alexander Falconbridge, and he has a lot of first-hand accounts of the information that Shawn talked about also.
And 164 Africans survived the trip, and Captain Nevis felt that the trip was a success. However, Ibrahim seemed to think that Africa had really been scudding the swells as if it were being chased. A quick passage was made. 7 of the 164 captives were deemed prime Negroes. On Monday, April 21st, 1788, the Africa entered the azure blue road of Rozier on the leeward side of the island. Ibrahim and his companions were the first arrivals from Africa in 3 weeks. Anchored 600 feet from the beach, the Africans shared the harbor only with schooners trading in French molasses and cocoa. The number of African vessels was down somewhat due to war scare and the hurricane damage. Captain Nevis reported his cargo at the custom house, contacted his agent, Samuel Cholet and company, and made certain that announcements of his arrival were sent to Martinique and Guadeloupe. Meanwhile, Ibrahim and the rest of the hold were mustered up into the sunshine of a brilliant Dominican spring. The weather was delightful that year. The island's sugar and cotton crops thriving. Cool and green, the island provided a contrast with the previous weeks that must have been startling to Ibrahim. A few weeks later, Ibrahim would be purchased. On May 1st, Irwin purchased Ibrahim. This is the 3rd time he had been sold, and 56 others, about 1/3 of Africa's cargo. He gave Cholet and Company his note for $4,090 in hard Mexican minute dollars for the amount. Records indicating the sex of those purchased show 3/4 of them were men. A good number of the Fulbe soldiers were among them, as well as some of the women and children added at the Niani Maru. It is not clear if their transfer could have taken place in the road. Others from Ibrahim's army were brought by Jerome Bourgeois, captain of the brig Catalona, New Orleans, which arrived late in the month. Bourgeois, if I'm saying his name right, took 100 aboard. As the Africans changed ships, Nevis filled their places in the twin decks with casks of indigo and barrels of sugar for the London market.
After 2 weeks at Roseau, Ibrahim left for New Orleans on May 2nd on the 65-ton Navarro. His route was west 1,600 miles across the Caribbean Sea to Yucatan Channel, then northwest 700 miles more to Mississippi River. This voyage and others like it rivaled the Atlantic crossing in horror, yet many historians have failed to mention them. The schooners, sloops, and one-deck vessels of intercontinental slave trade were not adapted to carry people, as Sir William Young will point out in his West India Commonplace book in 1807.
Ibrahim's journey of 6,000 miles ended at these muddy willow-lined banks in the backcountry of Mississippi. He was led from the barge, his long, unkempt hair falling in wriggles below his shoulders, his skin copper-colored in the summer sun. Even at worst, there was something impressive about him. The prince wrote, "A man who knew him is one who, having been once seen, would not be readily forgotten." His sharpness of expression must have caught the attention of a young white man who had come to the landing. He was a tobacco farmer, a person of simplicity and reserve, tall, dark-haired, serious in aspect. He was 26, the same age as Ibrahim. There was a plainness about him that seemed to say little money, little humor, little style. For the rest of Ibrahim's life, there would scarcely be a day when this man did not loom in his thoughts. When the American Revolution came to South Carolina backcountry in 1780, times grew so chaotic they seared themselves into the memory of anyone who lived through them. In the 96th district, said to be the home of the earliest Fosters of Natchez, there were a major battle and occupation, pillaging, and extensive partisan activities. Though the Fosters were revolutionary in sentiment, the upheaval settled their minds on immigration. They departed South Carolina during the closing days of war, and by 1783 were living near Natchez. The family included Mary Foster, a widow in her 60s, and her sons, John, James, William, and Thomas. The youngest of the brothers, Thomas, also the most retiring. The Fosters served as a typical representative taking control of their region from Great Britain during the Anglo-Saxon War of 1779 to 83. Now, the residents, principally of English stock, were alarmed at the change in the government, but they had little fear. The Spanish regime would be popular. Liberal immigration laws, religious tolerations, and land grants drew hundreds of settlers from the United States. Although the site was an isolated one, the population grew enormously. Like most of the immigrants, the Fosters were Yemen stock. Upon their arrival, they began to develop a 574-acre tract that Mary was warranted by the government. They gave her 574 acres, 6 miles northeast of the fort of Natchez. They grew tobacco and raised cattle on the land. In 1788, the brothers would leave the land and began buying their own or securing grants to claim their land near their mothers. All but Thomas would leave the nest as he tended to the farm and save his earnings in hopes of taking over his mother's land one day. With his brothers leaving to tend to their own needs, Thomas needed help.
In March, as Ibrahim led Khalfani into Africa, the widow received formal title to the land warranted her earlier by the Spanish government. The deed was a compliment to the family's industry, as it would not have been made unless they had improved their holding substantially. About the same time, the farm was expanded considerably with the purchase of a nearby parcel of 425 acres. But the purchase and grant lands amounted to 1,000 acres laying wilderness of forests and canebrake. A lifetime of labor would be required to clear fields and roads and put up fences, jobs enough even if one did not have to make a living at the same time. The departure of the older brothers had reduced the farm's labor force considerably. Thomas owned only one male worker, 15-year-old Jesse, an American-born black purchased the previous year out of a group of young people brought down from Kentucky. Word of Thomas Irwin's arrival was timely then. On about a Saturday, August 16th, Thomas rode into the town with his brother-in-law, William Gilbert, a small-time merchant who knew Irwin and had brought Africans before. Thomas was a regular at every sale in Natchez. Prices for manufactured goods were so high in this backwater that they sought out the bargain he could, such as the fine set of crockery he brought for $18 from the estate of local tradesmen. Here, too, he indulged his limited social life, hearing the news, posting a letter, and ambling over the quarter-mile horse track of the Batur. A Spanish officer had written 3 years earlier that the settlers loved to come to the landing on weekends. Saturday was court day, and every time that an inhabitant comes to present his complaint, he passes the entire day in town, where it is the custom, particularly of the common people, to deliver themselves up to drink with the greatest excess. Much business was done in Natchez. and boats usually left New Orleans on that day. The dirt streets thronged with farmers, flatboatmen, visiting Choctaw Indians, and slaves on the pass or the slide from the country. A predictable crowd had gathered to see Irwin's cargo. A lot of new Africans had been offered for 2 months, and with the tobacco harvest near, strong backs were at premium, despite the heavy African immigration into the district in the last year. Seeing the yellow-looking Fulby, the knot of farmers were probably pleased that Irwin had not brought them savage and interactable Ebos, the least popular Africans of Natchez. They were thought poor workers inclined to despondency and suicide, while the planters disliked them by name. They made a few fine distinctions between Africans based on their ethnic groupings. Most were sorted into great clumps like Gold Coast and Congo. Muslims were termed Mandingos. The Fulbe considered a Mandinka tribe. They were admired for their intelligence, but believed less capable of sustained labor than Guinea Negroes from under the West African boats. Thomas Foster joined a group of 4 men who pressed forward on Ibrahim and others. These prospective buyers were a spacious bunch. One of them, Jephthah Hignett, would not write his own name. Another, the equally illiterate George McKnight, was a dirt farmer who had never owned a slave before. The third, William Calvert, was an inebriate, so pernicious and cruel he would not give clothes to his own wife. Calvert's father, Frederick, was also present. All 4 had received grants on land within the last 12 months and now were in search of labor, although between them they could not put a real into Irwin's pocket. Only Thomas had money with him. The rest were talking, as usual, of 2 notes on the foraged crops of tobacco. As long as the Spanish government persisted in buying the tobacco harvest, tobacco notes sounded sweet enough to Irwin.
On Monday, August 18th, Thomas purchased Ibrahima and Samba in an agreement signed at the fort in the presence of Don Carlos de Grand Prix, civil and military commandant of the district. Thomas paid $930 for the 2, and that was less than one could have gotten for them along the coast. Now, this is the 4th time he's been sold. Led along behind Thomas' horses, Ibrahim returns the ancient Indian road onto a bluff north of Natchez, then turned eastward toward the area called Pine Ridge. The land was rolling, much cut up by ravines, and the open spaces were filled with the waist-high hogweed of summer, moss dipped from the limbs and the boughs of the trees like a dunker's beard. Arriving at Thomas's farm, Ibrahim identified himself and offered his owner a ransom. He did this before. It is possible his remarks were translated by a Mandinka in an intermediary for several, lived in Pine Ridge, and a teen-age Mandinka boy resided on the neighboring grant. Picture that extraordinary conversation. A scorned Muslim endeavoring to those explained to the incredulous and a little schooled farmer about a kingly father whose generosity would pour gold if his son was returned. Thomas could have been no more surprised if Ibrahim had expressed a desire to enter Harvard College and study for the ministry. Had he been the most human, best disposed citizen in Natchez, it is a problematic what he could have done. Futa appeared on a few maps of the period, and references to it were limited to specialized books on travel. There is no reason to think these works were in Thomas's library, if he had a library, or on the bookshelves in Natchez, even if he had felt an inclination to check the claims of his stern-faced African. As it was, he looked about uninterestedly while the plea went on, a bit of apprehensive about the quality of his new hand. Whites were suspicious of pretensions to royal birth. They caused decisions in the quarters and were an annoying source of extra institutional authority.
Ibrahim's effort was wasted, of course. His story was not credited, Gallup wrote. Thomas paying no attention to his royal blood. The prince had followed a natural impulse, playing a card that had to be dropped, but it drew attention to him and opened the prospect that he might be ridiculed. Speech gained only a backhanded concession to Ibrahim's identity, though that was an important one. Thomas decided that his slave's name should be Prince. People later thought this a kind of mock courtesy, but Thomas may not have intended it that way. The self-assured African acted as a role to which he had been born, even after the hell of the last 8 months. The name struck Thomas as a clever and fitting thing, and the matter was settled. As for ransom, Ibrahim needs worry only about paying off the one that had just been promised to Don Thomas. With that business closed, Thomas moved to more pressing concerns, such as some homespun trousers and a haircut for Ibrahima. The story of the countryside is that Ibrahima did not understand that his locks could be cut off at first, but when he did, a wild and resolute look swept his face. He would part with his tresses in his own country only with his life, wrote a friend to whom he had told the story in later years. As the shears were brought forward, he struggled violently to avoid them. He was knocked down and roped to a tree. Off came the plant's marks of great beauty and futa. Though concerned with the lice acquired after months of unsanitary confinement, Thomas was no doubt smart enough to know that he could initiate as well as disinfect with his right, cut off the ornaments of the past and with them a little of the past itself perhaps. But he never knew how truly devastating this ploy had been. The cutting was more than humiliation. He had given the son of Al-Mami something very close to the haircut of a Pula child. An account of Ibrahim's life states that he was confined for 3 days following this incident to get himself oriented. Then was brought out. He was needed to help gather the tobacco, which at last was thick enough and a proper color. A newly imported African like Ibrahima was seldom given the strong, sharp knife with which the ripe plants were cut. Not only was the possibility that the edge might be put to something other than tobacco, but also even a person cutting on the right object had to cut off judiciously. An experienced hand always sliced the leaves, while a Negro brute followed behind and carried away the harvest of his arms and shoulders.
Ibrahim would be subjected to slavery, and realizing this, he would begin to become very emotional to the point he would run away. Fugitives from labor were nothing new to Natchez, and the standard steps were taken. Since there was no newspapers in which to advertise, announcements of his flight were posted at the fort, at taverns, and at other public locations or places. Boatmen were alerted, and searches were made along St. Catherine's Creek and in Pine Ridge. But the patrols ferreted nothing out of the woods except the ordinary number of bear and southern panther. No sign of a track of the African was found. Days stretched into weeks. All the efforts to ascertain his whereabouts proved unavailing. Major Powell wrote, and after a while, inquiry was abandoned. Rumors would form around the whereabouts of Ibrahima. People wondered if he died in the swamps eaten by alligators, drowned in the bayou, or died of fatigue and hunger.
In the forest, meanwhile, a private drama was reaching its climax. Ibrahima had no place to go. He realized this and appears to have stayed near the farm, although his actual whereabouts are conjectural. The thought of fleeing to the north would not have occurred to him. Slavery had been outlawed in the Northwest Territory of the United States the previous year. But the fact would be important only to a person who understood American geography and politics. It was the thought of a cultivated travel slave, not a newly arrived African. Flight had no meaning for Ibrahima unless it resulted in return to Futa, something he knew was impossible. Occasionally, a runaway African would be found standing on the shore of the Gulf of Mexico looking out to sea. Ibrahima was not that naive.
One morning, after many weeks in the woods, Ibrahima returned to the farm. He walked up to the old blockhouse, opened the door, and stepped forward on the eave. Sarah Foster, who was sitting alone in the room sewing, looked at him in shock. The recreant prince stood before. Major Powell wrote, his tattered garments hung from him, and his face, his fierce eye was riveted upon her. From the tortured expression on his face, Sarah thought he intended to kill her. Death seemed imminent. Major Powell phased it. With marvelous presence of mind, given her belief, she rose, smiled at him, and held out her hand. It was a disarming thing to do. Ibrahima would yield in a submission to her and kneel while lifting her foot and placing it on his shoulder. The gesture was a special one to a West African soldier like himself. A conqueror's foot on a puller neck often preceded a spear thrust into the heart. Ibrahima meant by it something his ignorance of English did not let him say. He was placing his life in the hands of the Fosters. If they wanted him back, here he was. If they wanted to kill him, they could do that too. Ibrahim would then become an esteemed slave to the Foster family, and with his efforts, he would later move up in the rankings as time progressed. He learned how to speak English and would often be asked questions about his life back on the continent by peers. He was asked in later years, when he had learned to speak English, if slavery at Natchez and at Timbo weren't really the same. No, no, he replied earnestly. I tell you, a man owned slaves at Timbo, he joined a religion, he very good. He make his slaves work till noon, go to church, then till his sun go down. They worked for themselves. They raised cotton, sheep, cattle, plenty. With the drastic changes to Ibrahim's life and the constant thoughts of back home, he would often wonder about his wife and son he left behind. Then suddenly a female slave named Isabella would capture not only the breath of Ibrahima, but give life to the plantation. It is said that she was a beautiful woman who was fine looking and quite affectionate and easygoing. Not long after her arrival, Isabella was married to Ibrahima. One writer reporting the local tradition states that the ceremony was performed on Christmas Day in 1974 by Thomas, who read passages from the Bible and blessed their union. Although Ibrahim and Isabella were married, wedlock would later be attached to their status due to the fact that society didn't recognize marriage among slaves, but that Ibrahim was no ordinary milestone, and it marked the coming to grips with the terrible life he had faced. Excuse me. They do this from time to time. That he was trapped. Now, over time, Thomas would give special privilege to Ibrahim and his wife Isabella. Thomas would allow them to work their own garden and sell produce in town at the local market. He also sold Spanish moss, which was dried and fashioned into a cool moss mattress, much preferred for summer sleeping. These activities brought Ibrahim humbly onto a fringe of Natchez cash economy and an economy not widespread in Futa. More important, perhaps, it allowed him to mingle with the slave population in Natchez on Saturdays and Sundays, a time equivalent for religious and social activity to Fridays in Futa. After a few years, Ibrahima would meet someone from home, Abdul Rahman Ibrahima. The man cried out seeing him, dropping his face to the earth. It was a tribute of respect to Ibrahima, done out of habit, though then wildly out of place. The person is identified only as a Negro, Ibrahima's father's dominion. Possibly he was a Jalunki who had been sold or stolen from the country. It was people like that who would bring Ibrahima news about his family back home and update him on the things that have taken place.
One day during the summer of 1807, Ibrahima walked into Washington, a large basket balanced on his head. Sambo was with him. It was a trip they had made 100 times, along a dirt road that ran from Pine Ridge to the village. Washington was less than an hour's walk. Ibrahima had some sweet potatoes he intended to sell. The money he received would be his own. Thomas was more liberal in this regard than some of the other planters were, and although Ibrahima never had a significant amount of money, he was able in time to buy decent clothes for everyone in his family. Ibrahima looked for customers along the main street. There was always slaves and Indians in town trying to sell pumpkins, turkey, moss brooms, even hand-carved trays of occasion. Among the passerby that day was a middle-aged white man. He rode so peculiar that he caught Ibrahim's attention. There was not only something peculiar about him, there was something familiar too. Go see that man, he told Sambo. If he has but one eye, I've seen him before. That was the case, and when Sambo told him so, Ibrahima rushed into the street as the man rode past. Not wishing to stop him without a reason, Ibrahima held out his basket and said, "Master, you want to buy some potatoes?" "What potatoes have you?" replied the man, pulling up while he looked at the potatoes. Ibrahima said later, I observed him carefully and knew him, but he did not know me. The rider studied the puller in the face. His eyebrows came together and his mouth pursed. Boy, where did you come from? He said. From Mr. Foster's. And were you raised in this country? No, Ibrahim said. I came from Africa. You came from Timbo? Yes, sir. Is your name Abdul Raham? Yes, that is my name. Do you know me? The rider asked. Yes, Ibrahim replied. I know you very well. You beat Dr. Cox. By this singular act of providence, a contemporary wrote Dr. Cox was brought to recognize in person of his slave, the son of a king who had treated him with so much hospitality in Africa. When the doctor said his name, Ibrahim felt as if he had been hit by something. His body could not handle its emotions. Some say he bowed to the doctor, others that he danced or jumped or threw a watermelon high into the air. One thing was for certain, he was smiling now. The one white man in the world who owed him a great favor was there in the street before him. It was wildly improbable. It was fanciful. It was insane. But it also was happening.
Springing from his horse, Cox seized Ibrahim and embraced him violently. What was he doing here? How had he come to this country? The questions poured forth, for Cox was no less shocked than Ibrahim. Such a meeting, Gallaudet wrote, can more easily be conceived and described. Dash down your potatoes and come to my house, the doctor said. The joy of even this minute, however, could not efface 19 years of poverty. Ibrahim could not let his potatoes go. Cox mounted, rode quickly away, and returned with the woman to watch them for him. Soon at the doctor's lodging, Ibrahim laid out the tale of his woes, war, the captor, the bondage. A little later, Governor Williams appeared. The doctor, whom the governor had known for years, had sent a note on impulse to the little plantation in Washington where Williams resided, asking for his presence. I have been to this boy's father's house, Cox said to the governor, and they treated me as kindly as my own parents, Cox told Williams. Ibrahim stated later, if any amount of money would purchase me, he would buy me and send me home. The morning after their meeting, Cox rode out to the Foster plantation. With the Ibrahim beside him, he told Thomas of this African adventure. In the fullness of his gratitude for Sora's humanity, the doctor stated he wished to intercede for his own son's liberty. He inquired how much would purchase me, Ibrahim said, but my master was unwilling to sell. Cox began to name figures of his own, each a little higher than the previous one. Each was refused. Finally, he offered $1,000, money he may not have had, and nearly twice the going rate at forks of the road. Again, the planter said no. The doctor made every possible exertion to obtain the liberation, but Prince Master would not part with him for any price. Years later, Ibrahim's friends professed themselves unable to understand why. Exertions were made on the part of Dr. Cox, emancipate him and enable him to return to his native country. Cyrus Griffin wrote, but from causes altogether inexplicable to me, it was never effected. The reasons were simple enough. Thomas thought it idle to speak of returning home. How then would Ibrahim far beyond the pine ridge of indigenous African without skills or means of livelihood? His master doubted whether his freedom would increase his happiness, wrote Gallaudet, added a Connecticut editor who would meet Ibrahim subsequently. Thomas knew of no other place in which he thought the prince would be more comfortable than on his estate. The truth was that Thomas depended on Ibrahim. The African was his steadiest worker, a faithful two hands at every task, and there was his moral example. He was so valuable as a slave and so serviceable to Foster by the salutary influence which he exerted over all the slaves on his plantation that he could not consent to part with him. Simply stated, Ibrahim had made himself invaluable. If you cannot part with him, Cox said at the length, use him well. Many attempts to purchase Ibrahim from Thomas continued as years passed. However, his answer stood as firm as possible. Ibrahim was starved for the purpose continue to work and move up in the ranks. Ibrahim would even start attending church services, but maintaining his faith in Islam. He and his family would attend not only Presbyterian services where Thomas attended, but also Baptist services due to his wife Isabella being a member of the Baptist church. These references to Ibrahim's interest in the principal Protestant denominations are important. Religious services were more than a diversion for him. As he came to understand English, he was about to have the Christian beliefs explicated. Now listen to this, y'all. One who understands Islam and the Quran was on the way to understanding the Fulbi of Futa Jalon, or the Fulani. Could Christianity be equally instructive about natures? His study of Islamic literature is assurance that he had already knew the people and the events of some Christian preaching, particularly the Old Testament from the Old Testament favorites of natures. Adam and Eve, Abraham and Jacob, Moses and David, and the many details about Jesus were known to him before he left Africa. To learn the rest became his ambition. Unable to read the Bible, he listened to, read, and heard sermons on his teachers. Mississippi Presbyterians certainly did not want slaves like Ibrahim as fellow members. In 1816, blacks could be seen hanging uncertainly around the doors of the church in Natchez, anxious to enter, yet afraid to do so as no place had been assigned to them. Wealthy and conservative Salem allowed no slave members. The Methodists were more receptive, and so were the Baptists. And it was these two faiths, particularly the latter, that appealed to Ibrahim. Ibrahim would further acculturate in his role of a Negro slave and acceptance of his fate moving forward. Not losing his identity, he would take a liking to Christianity, but he would have some objections to certain Christian claims like Jesus being a son of God, and or agree that this place in heaven is higher than Muhammad's. Ibrahim's statements on Christianity show his particular disappointment at the social consequences of conversion. It has already been stated that the Fulbi has scruples about enslaving their fellow Muslims. The conversions of slaves to the religion of their owners in Futa may not have brought automatic emancipation to all, but it did to many, and it opened the door to the rest. The curse of Ham, the color basis of slavery, had been laid aside in West Africa by the arguments of Ahmad Baba and 17th century scholar of Timbuktu, and by others. Dr. Cox of Ibrahim's relationship never wavered, and they continued to see each other often. One account states that the elder Cox brought him a pen and some paper for his own use. It would have been a precious gift if he did. But the same source goes willy-nilly on to say that he arranged for Mary Foster to teach him to write English. That would have been challenging work for Mother Mary, since she never learned to write herself. One does wonder, however, if Cox, so convenient to the plantation, was the family doctor. There is no direct information on the question, but he was sometime physician to the Bislands, Thomas' neighbors, and to reach their farm, he had to take a road that passed within a few yards of Ibrahim's cabin. He never forgot who lived there. The Protector du Prince was the title a newsman gave the doctor. It implies an active, friendly agency in his behalf. As for anything more substantial, Dr. Cox often renewed his application to buy Ibrahim. Gallaudet wrote, but always in vain. He offered large sums for me, Ibrahim said, but they were refused. Their long friendship closed in December 1816. The doctor fell ill with an unknown sickness that month and went rapidly down. He had found time for the Lashley Waverley novel and the Chateaubriand's travel, but to form he had not bothered to make out a will. Governor Williams, at his home Sunday, the 15th, heard his oral statement. I wish my wife to have one half of all my estate, the other half for the use of my children and their education. The doctor told him. 30 minutes later, he was dead. The Washington Republican of Natchez Intelligencer printed this obituary on December the 18th. Died on the 15th instant at the residence in the town of Washington, Dr. John C. Cox, after an illness of 4 days. He died in his senses with uncommon ease and composure of mind, now losing his vivacity of disposition, the eminent rank he held in the science of his profession, and the plenty of character in private life, and his reputation as a gentleman. Together, his widespread general acquaintance rendered by any obituary remarks unnecessary.
30 years I labored hard, Ibrahim said in 1828. The last 10 years I have been indulged a good deal. The prince referred to his superannuation from the field in 1818. He was 56 then, and although he had lost most of his teeth, his general health was still good and showed promise of surviving for some time to come. He had a long confidence of his owner. Now meant the new level of plantation responsibility that a future acquaintance, in whatever termed employment and confidential trust. With it came a precious amount of unsupervised time. The Negro Ibrahim was not kept under much subjection as it respects to personal liberty. From that year, stated the Louisiana Advertiser, and he frequently came to Natchez. After the elder Dr. Cox died, his son offered a great price for me, Ibrahim said. Imagine the confusion if Thomas had suddenly said yes. Luckily, Ibrahim's future did not rest solely with him. A new and remarkable person named Andrew Marschalk had entered his life. Marschalk, son of a baker, was born of Dutch ancestry in New York State in 1767. The runaway apprentice of New York printer, he served subsequently as an infantry officer during the Indian Wars in Ohio in the early 1790s. And he came to Mississippi with the army at the time of the Spanish evacuation in 1798. He brought with him his first printing press in the territory, a small mahogany unit with a 30-pound font on it. In 1802, he settled permanently in Adams County, establishing the Mississippi Herald, first in line a free-hitting newspaper. In addition to holding the contracts for the government printing at times, Marschalk sold books, quires of paper, and in his early days, even a little patent medicine cheap. He published the Washington Republican at the territorial capital during the War of 1812 years, but afterward returned to Natchez, a more prosperous place, in 1890. He was editing the Mississippi State Gazette there.
It may have been as early as 1803 that Ibrahim met him, but the opportunity for close acquaintanceship did not come until the African began frequenting the market. Prince is really a most extraordinary man, he wrote a lady friend, born to a kingdom well educated, for he now writes Arabic in most elegant style, brought a slave into a foreign country. He has been faithful, honest, humble, and industrious. I did not look upon Prince or Ibrahim as a mere biped slave, he wrote elsewhere, but as a dignified captive, a man born to command, unjustly deprived of his liberty. One day in 1820 or 1821, Ibrahim was in the colonel's printing office next door to his house, looking longingly at the volumes of his bookshelf. I produced to him a printer's grammar, Marschalk recalled, containing among other specimens of type from Type Foundry, one in Arabic. Ibrahim was immensely interested when he saw the script and remarked it was the first of his country writing he had seen since he left home. He requested permission to copy it, which he did in a very neat and handsome style. Producing a facsimile, he also rendered it in English. Ibrahim's next remark was momentous, as in Indian life. Although it did not seem so at the time, he expressed a wish to write a letter to his own country. Marschalk continued. If he knew how to send it, seldom short of answers, the colonel knew exactly how. Thomas D. Anderson, a friend of him from Pennsylvania, was then a United States consul in North Africa. Anderson could forward it from there. I assured Prince I would send this letter for him, Marschalk stated. Several years would pass and still no letter from Ibrahim had been written. Ibrahim had forgotten so much grammar by his fourth decade in slavery that only sections of the Quran came to him effortlessly. He would not have written a proper letter home, but rusty calligraphy alone cannot explain this reluctance. Marschalk believed he was a Moor. I'm going to say it again. Marschalk believed he was a Moor and in fact belonged to the royal family of Morocco. Ibrahim himself said so, the colonel wrote. In the closing years of the century, French imperialists and Fouta would claim the deception was a principal trait of Ibrahim's people. It was at least the national condemnation of treachery and impostor of abundance. The lie comes quickly to a ripe age. He who digs a hole will be the first to fall in it. If daylight came suddenly one night, we would find that the hyenas aren't the only evil creatures on the loose, and so on. Could Ibrahim, famished for attention, have observed the colonel mistake Futa for Morocco, found the era convenient, and adopted the place? The conjecture has a virtue. It explains why no letter was written that day or could ever be written. Ibrahim was no better known in Morocco than Marsh Chalk. A reply would embarrass and discredit him.
This interpretation of motives is flawed, however. Ibrahim was soon to have an interview with Cyrus Griffin, a man who knew something Marsh Chalk did not, the difference between a Moor and a puller. Since Griffin learned from him precisely what his country was, Ibrahim must not have been rusing. Morocco, it appears, was the colonel's own notion, Ibrahim supplying and truthfully the fact of his royal family, hampered by the prince's imperfect English. Marsh Chalk let Islamic beliefs and literacy in Arabic mislead him. It may have been a fortunate mistake if it enhanced the colonel's interest, but it was not a purposeful misrepresentation. So Ibrahim, conscious of no deception, did not delay writing in the case to the wrong country for fear of exposure. While he did delay in speculative, could it have been fear of offending Thomas or seeming restless or unappreciative of the scraps of distinction thrown his way? Could it have been that he considered the jester fertile? Isabella did, the colonel said. She was unwilling to believe that there was a reality in his project of being liberated by writing home. Would such a letter even be delivered or be answered? And what might have the answer be after so many years and so many turns in fortune, not only in Natchez, but in Futa too? Was it worth awakening the old hopes, resurrecting the old hurts, or was it better to forget it? Was it better instead to draw the blanket tightly on and up over his head and just die?
Here we have an image of the person that the people in our community claim to be Ibrahim. This is Sultan Abad al-Rahmah, and he was born in 1822 to 1859. Remember, in 1788, when Ibrahim was captured, he was 26 years old. So this claim can go out the window. The above image, like I said, I misspoke. The above image is Sultan Abdul Ahmaram in 1822 to 1859, a Moor from Morocco. That image is not Ibrahim. The age difference is evident here. In his own words, we have heard him state that he comes from Timbo and he is a Futa Fulani. Throughout this presentation, many Moors have made this claim to numerous reasons, and those who hold true to this claim today have not read up on the subject matter. Ibrahim would finally write that letter in October 3rd, 1826. In so doing, he wrote the only thing he could remember well, the whole of it from the Quran. What passage he quoted is not known, as no copy of the manuscript was kept. Taking it, Marsh Chalk wrote a cover letter addressed to Thomas B. Reed, a United States Senate from Mississippi, then in town. His note reads in full: "Dear Sir, the enclosed letter in Arabic was written in my presence by a venerable old slave named Prince, belonging to Mr. Thomas Foster of this country. I have known him for about 15 years and can bear full testimony to this very correct deportment. He claims to belong to the royal family of Morocco, and the object of this letter, as he states it to be, is to make inquiry after his relations and with the hope of joining them. I have undertaken to endeavor to forward this letter for him and therefore beg leave and commitment to your care, with the request that you will lend your aid to this old man's wishes." Somebody has something to say? All right, I'm going on.
On March 14, 1827, Ibrahim's quotation in Marsh Chalk's letter reached the Esquire of Thomas Molney, the United States Consul in Tangier, Morocco. Molney, a native of Pottsgrove, Pennsylvania, had been appointed to his post in 1820 by James Monroe. He had witnessed the last years of the reign of a great Mullah Suleiman II and the succession of his nephew Abd al-Rahim II. Morocco, as President John Quincy Adams had told him, was the first to set example of abandoning the general practice of predations against the Christian nations. Slavery of Christians had also been abandoned formally by treaty. An important aspect of Moltoni's job was securing the release of any Africans cast away on Moroccan shores. Ibrahim's document was a bizarre twist in the ordinary, then and certainly an opportunity. It was something to do as well. The council had not heard from the Secretary of State since 1825. On the day he received the communications, Moltoni visited the Emperor's Pasha and laid them before him. I received through the Department of State a letter written in Arabic. He wrote, "The intentions of the letter writer appears to me to prove he is a Moor, as the text is taken from the Quran to excite an exertion for his relief. The documents appear to be clear of deception. No hint of Ibrahim's nationality could have been gained from the letter any more than an excerpt from a Latin Bible would indicate to what country in Europe or America the writer belonged. The text identified Ibrahim only by his faith, then not his nationality. The large cursive letters of his hand could have belonged to a subject of an empire. The impression was that they did. Abd al-Rahim II acted with accustomed speed. He wanted the writer, possibly a Moroccan, but undeniably a Muslim, free and would even pay for it. The Pasha tells me on the arrival here in Tangiers, note that the council, all expenses will be immediately reimbursed. I submit an opinion to Honorable Secretary of State. Moltoni wrote to Washington on the subject. By liberating and sending this man home, it will in the future yield a benefit to unfortunate persons who may fall by accident in the power of subjects belonging to his empire. I do most earnestly wish this man to be sent here to me, that he may be restored to his king and family. If the Honorable Secretary of State condescends to agree with my opinion, the man can be sent to our council at Gibraltar, from thence to me. His liberty would give me an important power and prove Muslims have more gratitude with other good qualities than they generally allow by travelers who suppress their virtues, which will overbalance their vices." Plaintively, Moltoni added the thought, "The funds I am allowed, I regret to say, will forever check and never produce a generous respect for men in general." The council's letter was dated March 24th, 1827. It arrived in Washington on June 5th the same year. Henry Clay, the Secretary of State, docketed it. "The proprietor of purchase of the slave of sending him home is respectfully recommended, H.C." The chief clerk of the State Department, Daniel Brett, then took the letter to the White House. It reached President Adams early in July. He wrote in his diary on July 10th, "Mr. Brent came for papers relating to an African who appears to be subject of the Emperor of Morocco, but is a slave in Georgia. He procured a letter to be written from him to the Emperor of Morocco, by whom it was communicated to Mr. Moltoni. He has sent the translation of it here, with an earnest recommendation that government of the United States should purchase the man and send him home as a complimentary donation to the Emperor. I request Mr. Brent to write to Georgia and ascertain the price for which he could be purchased, and if practicable, to carry into effect the wish of Mr. Moltoni." On January 12th, the substance of his concern was forwarded to Colonel Marschalk in a letter from Brent. "In consequence of the interest which you appear to take in the case," Brent wrote, "the President has directed me to request information from you on the following points. First, would Mr. Foster be willing to sell the slave with a view to his return to his native country? Second, if so, what price would be demanded for him? On receiving your answers to these interrogatories, the President will be enabled to determine whether he can interpose in any matter tending to promote the object which you desire."
Marschalk received this letter in August, and as he wrote later, "I took the earliest opportunity of making the necessary inquiries." He found the planter still unwilling to sell, but Thomas said he had already told Ibrahim that if he could find someone to take him to Futa, he could go. The possibility of that happening had been annulled until now, but with a chance at hand, he still was agreeable. He spent too much time with Ibrahim not to have helped him make it to the court of Croesus. Marschalk reaped the result. I immediately waited for Mr. Foster, the colonel reported, and he promptly replied that he had signified to Prince, the slave, some years ago his willingness to permit him to return to his native country if he could be effective without any expense to him, Mr. F., and that he was at present willing to give him his liberty. There was one condition. Ibrahim should enjoy that liberty only in Africa and not in the United States. Possessions of it here, Marshall continued, might operate to his Mr. F inconvenience by an improper influence over his children remaining with him as slaves. Curiously, the planner refused to make a written declaration of his sentiments. Notoriously a Jackson's man, did Thomas loathe the Adams Clay administration that much, as was he just above condescension to his business. Now, Mr. Foster declined complying with my request to signify his wishes. In writing, there seemed little enough reason why the colonel merely observing he is a planner of very retired habits. He was stubborn. Months would pass with no actual reply about the conditions of Ibrahim's return trip home. But Marshall and Ibrahim became overly anxious. Cyrus Griffin would later join in helping Ibrahim get his freedom. In so doing, he too then would write a letter to the secretary inquiring about any news regarding Ibrahim. The letter would come February 18, 28 from H. Clay, but bore the date of January 12th.
Sir, your letters, both of the 13th ultimo and the 20th of August last, have been received. The president is obliged by your attention to the subject of the Moorish slave, now in possession of Mr. Thomas Foster. The object of the president being to restore Prince, the slave mentioned, to his family and country for the purpose of making favorable impressions in behalf of the United States. There is no difficulty in acceding to the conditions presented by Mr. Foster, which I understand to be that Prince shall not be permitted to enjoy his liberty in this country, but be sent to his own free from expense to Mr. Foster, was pleased to ask nothing for the manumissions of Prince of these conditions. I have therefore to request that you will complete the human agency which you have so kindly undertaken by calling upon Mr. Foster, assuring him the above conditions shall be complied with, and receiving the custody Prince from him. You will please to send Prince to this city, either by river or by sea, as you may determine to be the most convenient for the purpose of being transported to his native country. I am, with great respect, your obedient servant, H. Clay. On Friday, February the 22nd, Thomas and Ibrahim rode into Natchez. For both of them, the trip was a closing of circles, a strange denouncing of the day that had ridden out of the city in August 1788, when youth and uncertainty were before him. Now both were old and worn, and could count what time remained to them in months rather than years. At the printing office, Thomas gave the colonel a deed in trust for the Prince. I, Thomas Foster, a citizen of Adams County in the state of Mississippi, the document read, at present, the owner of the slave named Prince, have this day delivered unto Andrew Marshchalk of the city of Natchez in state aforesaid the custody of the said slave Prince, for the sole and only purpose of his being transported to his native country by the government of the United States. More was interlined before a slave, probably Marshchalk's suggestion. Thomas signed the deed and left the office.
This is the deed of convenience for Ibrahim in 1788. This is an actual copy of the facsimile of the primary, okay? This is what it looked like. And here would read out what I just basically said earlier.
The colonel was beside himself at these developments. He made Ibrahim a guest in his home in the weeks prior to his departure and was so absorbed in the business that he seemed ridiculous to some. The colonel absolutely bored the President of the United States and the Secretary of State for 2 or 3 years with his importunities to get him liberated, wrote Captain Cook. And when Mr. Clay wrote to him, took his letter to the market house and made a great parade about it, and bored everybody that came into the office and everybody out of it, boasting and gabbing from daylight until breakfast and up the street and down. To Cyrus' amazement, the colonel suggested that they give Ibrahim a public dinner before he left. Here clearly was an idea whose time had not come. Afterward, he asked the attorney to draft a document which he would imprint on parchment expressing the esteem in which Ibrahim was held by those who knew him. This was to be attested to by the signatures of numerous individuals and affixed with the great seal of the state. It is scarcely necessary for me to say, Griffin observed, that I did not assent to the absurdity of sending home the heir apparent to the throne of an independent kingdom with official testimonial of his industry of the cotton field. Someone imposed that Ibrahim travel to Washington by the way of ship from New Orleans. The colonel objected. He thought it might be beneficial for Ibrahim to pass through the West in order that he might be able to understand and convey to countrymen to the extent of power of the United States. Accordingly, arrangements were made for Ibrahim and Isabella to take passage to the steamboat Neptune, which will call the second week in April for passengers to Cincinnati. Marshchalk hoped Ibrahim might later visit the Northeast. Perhaps by doing so, he told Cyrus, he may raise money enough to purchase his family. The colonel had his way on one other matter. Clay had authorized him to spend $200 to clothe Ibrahim and send him to Washington. His master's indulgence had enabled him to possess himself of a very decent and gentle wardrobe. I therefore appropriate a part of some place at my disposal to furnishing him with a handsome Moorish dress appropriate to his rank prior to his captivity. $70 went to fashion in this finery: a white muslin turban topped with a crescent, a blue cloth coat with yellow buttons, white battalions gathered at the ankles, and yellow boots. Even a cimeter was discovered and added to the outfit. A tawdry dress, to which I most positively objected, Griffin groaned. Those like him accustomed to Ibrahima in homespun thought the cloth's effect on the African was ludicrous. Such was not the colonel's intent. He knew that Ibrahima would be appealing to charity after he had left Natchez. These cloths would attract attention. The suit was also the colonel's touching attempt to distinguish the prince as a person. The indulgence of appearing before the president in the garb of his country and rank was a thing of but little moment as to expense and what he was only in justice entitled to. You can't have your years back, Marshall seemed to be saying. At least you can have your clothes.
Ibrahim, followed by his wife, children, and grandchildren, passed through the dirt streets of Natchez for the last time. Almost 20 people were in his procession, Marshall concluded. It was indeed a very interesting sight, wrote an observer. The appearance of a prince was venerable and dignified. His whole family gave the strongest evidence that they are the property of a man who feels the proper duties of a Christian master. At the same landing where he had arrived 40 years before, Ibrahim bid them a final adieu. He was encouraging and told them he would get the money to purchase them soon, if he could, but realize his prospects and regain his property at Timbo, he could buy them free at 10 prices. Ibrahim and
Shawn, we can't hear you, man. The hell? Shawn, unmute your mic.
I don't know how my mic got muted.
It says the tapping around muted your mic.
Oh. He got something to say, man.
What happened?
You muted his mic.
Man, that wasn't me, man. My daughter did that, man.
Oh, it says
What slide? What? Oh, okay. What y'all didn't hear, Kofi?
I
go back to 76.
Yeah,
well, did y'all hear? This is why I went mute.
Yeah, that's where you went
I stepped away for 1 second, man. She done mess with every time I get away from the computer. She mess with it.
So y'all didn't hear me say Ibrahim followed by his wife, children, and grandchildren.
Yeah, we got that one. It was the next slide.
Okay. So Ibrahim and Isabella would head north on the Neptune until they reached Louisville and then Cincinnati. Ibrahim would walk the city on Cincy in his costume. It was the first day of 10 months appearance in what Americans believed to be the costume of his country. The Cincinnati Republican editor wrote about Ibrahim's appearance, and 2 other newspaper outlets in the city also published articles about him. One published an excerpt of a letter to the Colonization Society. Yes, the African Colonization Society, which published articles nationally in a magazine. Toward the end of April, Ibrahim left Cincinnati and traveled on up to Ohio to Wheeling, Virginia, from there to Pennsylvania, Maryland, and towards Baltimore. Newsmen followed his progress, and their accounts, widely reprinted in Boston, New York, and other seaboard cities, have the Prince of Timbuktu dashing through sleepy little villages in a coach and 4. Ibrahima has editors writing about him even before he left Natchez. Ibrahima, once he made it to Washington, would be treated pretty fairly as a guest. He stayed in the mansion in a nice room and was very grateful for how he was received. Ibrahima was soon before the president in his office on the 2nd floor of a mansion. The meeting was a rather extraordinary juncture of people. Adams' impressive hire to a great tradition, and Ibrahima, son of a distinguished father himself, fresh from 40 years in slavery, now meeting the president in relative equality. While officials continue to talk about him, about Morocco, Ibrahima would have something else in mind for his return trip. It was here he explained that his home was more closely to Liberia than Morocco, and he would not know how he would be received by people in Morocco. The president would rescind sending Ibrahima to either place, Natchez or Morocco. So now he just in the United States, stuck in Washington.
Today, the more Prince came to the office. Prince came fully up to my expectations and to the accounts which have been given of him. There is something truly dignified in his deportment and manner, and he is acute and intelligent on every subject that was mentioned. I showed him the map of Africa, and on pointing out Cape Mesurado in Liberia to him, he instantly mentioned in what direction Timbo lay, and the distance, with surprising accuracy, mentioned the names of 2 places where he had been at school, both of which I instantly found inscribed with the names of various towns and territories between Timbo and Timbuktu.
Ibrahim will write his kids back in Natchez about his tired trip to Washington, the hurdles he had faced. Returning to his homeland didn't look too promising, as he had figured out another way to get home. The Colonization Society would later help him, and a plan was put in place to make sure the prince could return home. The prince would then make himself available for raising funds, not only to purchase his children, but way home. Over the next few months, awaiting an opportunity to board a ship, he would travel to various places along the East Coast, partly to raise money, the other to speak on behalf of the Colonization Society. Many of them saw opportunity in Ibrahim and often tried converting him to Christianity along the way. He would never waver, although he respected their beliefs and traditions. Thomas Foster would later hear about Ibrahim's travels and began to cry out, but Ibrahim would not let that stop him from completing his mission to return home. Remember, he did not want Ibrahim embellishing anywhere in the United States. You either going to Africa or you staying here on this plantation with me.
President of the United States has been informed that the bearer of Abdul Rahman was held in a state of slavery by a citizen of the United States, that he was of Moorish descent and a person of much consideration in his native country of Africa, and that his emancipation from slavery would be very agreeable for the Emperor of Morocco, The undersigned Secretary of State in the United States was directed by the President to adopt measures for liberation of the before-mentioned Moor, Abdul Rahman, and for his transportation to his family and connections of native country. His manumission was accordingly procured from the citizens of the United States who held in him as a slave, and he came to the city at the public expense last spring. It was the President's intention to have him transported to Tangier to be delivered to the Emperor of Morocco, but as Abdul Rahman prefers to go into the American colony of Liberia on the coast of Africa, from whence he expects to be able to reach his relations, the President yields to his desire, and accordingly he proceeds to Norfolk in company of his wife to obtain at the expense of the United States a passage in the ship Herit, a vessel chartered by the American Colonization Society, which is preparing to sail for Liberia about the 20th of this month. In testimony of the foregoing, I have hereunto set my hand and affixed the seal of the Department of State the 17th day of January in the year of Lord 1829.
Now, before I move forward, I asked a question to a bunch of people claiming to be aboriginals and indigenous to this native land, and also claim this reverse slave trade, to say that they were kidnapped from America and sent back to all these other places. Okay, within your ignorance, we asked you, could you name a slave ship that took you home, and you can't name a slave ship. Well, this is the Herit. This is the news article, December 12th, for the Herit. The Herit is a ship that took people that were returning, that wanted to return to Africa back. That's what the Free African Society, what the Free African Colonization Society did. They took people who wanted to go back to Africa, that whole little movement. Okay, and you can get into the details of that and deal with the African Colonization Society the way you want to deal with it. But this is the ship name. Now, had you for instance, been honest and said, you know what, that was just people immigrating back to Liberia and Sierra Leone, things would have been cool, and then you could right your wrongs. But instead, you hold true to this reverse slave trade notion, and you continue to push an agenda that is disingenuous. So, since you couldn't name a ship that left America and took people to Africa, I did it for you. Now you have a ship name. But you can't use the ship name because these were free people that were going back to Africa on their own accord. No shackles, no bondage, nothing. It was Ibrahim's farewell, appropriately religious to America. On Saturday, February 7th, in 1829, the Herit cast off and dropped down to the forts where Hampton Roads and Chesapeake Bay met. On February 9th, it rolled the strong winds of the bay at sea. Ibrahim as he appeared in New York in 1829, sketched by Henry Inman, courtesy of the Library of Congress. Notice on the image below his picture, they put the face smile of the facsimile of the Moorish prince's writing, which I showed you earlier. But that's his writing, him writing his name, Abdul Rahman. Now, I also showed you that this ignorance came from Mashchalk, the changing of his name. He's a Fulani. He lives, Timbuktu is nowhere near Morocco. This is an African, dignified, converted to, to Islam. So he held the name and the conversion in that area. That's a whole nother argument. He himself has told his account. He always stressed the fact that he was a Fulani from Timbuktu. He was no more. He also visited the African Free School in 1813, and this is just a copy of the actual building that once was then out of a newspaper clipping of the New York African Free School in 1830. Ibrahim's life made it to the big screen. You have two movies that have resemblances of his actual enslavement and that has been wrote about and critiqued. You have A Prince Among Slaves and you have Roots. Now, I don't know if many people know this, but I got to thank Brother Ben for the jewel that Roots was actually sued because, you know, they used a lot of Ibrahim's story in this movie and was never, you know, given, they never gave the author of it credit. Now, these actors tell the sad but true story of Ibrahim during the 2000s, Angeles on the Bluff tour. While Ibrahim is not buried in Natchez, some of the people who helped gain his freedom are Noelle Ann Bennett White, portraying her ancestor Andrew Marshall. I put all their names together. You have Noelle, then you have Ann. Noelle is in this. Noelle is the black guy, Ben is the white guy, and Ann is the white woman. They put on this play in the Angels of the Bluff tour. Kofi should know this. However, he didn't. So I had to tell him.
You had to put me on blast like that, man. I didn't know.
Trim is two. Trim is two. She in the chat. She in the chat. And the brother and the other brother from Mississippi. You know what I'm saying? He knew, but hey, did you know about the play? The other Kofi. Let me move on. They are my sources. We're going to keep it straight like that. These are my sources. Pause the video, screenshot it, whatever you want to do. Here are my picture references. Any picture imagery that I had in this presentation, I give credit to the picture imagery as well. In closing, I just want to thank everybody that tuned in. This was a long ride. Usually when I have 80 slides, it's a long ride, and I didn't want to be this long, so I was trying to get on through it. However, I appreciate everybody that tuned in, whether it be late or on time, and was steadfast in this course. Now, we did answer some questions that we did answer some questions and deal with some claims along the way. We also showed the side of the enslavement of someone and their captivity and that process that actually took place. Ibrahim was sold 4 times. Not only him, but his right-hand man, Samba, who I really didn't elaborate on, but some say that the name Sambo came from Samba, which is a whole nother argument, and I didn't want to get into all of that, but you know, that's what the writers say. I would like to thank Terry Alford for his contributions in writing the true story on A Prince Among Slaves, and also Alan Finchman. Hold on, let me get his name right. What's his name? Wait, yeah, hold up. Alan Huffman, who wrote Mississippi in Africa, which sprung me to read the book that I already had because I read Mississippi in Africa first, and then I went to Terry Alford's work and read it, and then I went to the UNESCO volume 6 to pull the source out for the Abdul Rahman sources to clear that up. So you know, when I'm reading these books and things of that nature, I can refer back to the books that I've already read, and I can pull from them the information that I know that would debunk the claims. So to my our supposedly Moorish brothers, Native Americans, there was some information in this particular presentation that y'all got to deal with and address. And you know, I like to, again, you know, thank everybody for tuning in. If you have any questions in the chat room, now's the time to do that. Brother Kofi, I know he got something to say, and we're gonna let Brother Satep Rock go in, and I'm quiet, man. I talked for 2 hours.
Oh no, I had a question. Then I don't know if we talked about this, you know what I'm saying, in the back chat or on the phone or off the air. When did a ceremony given to Ibrahim and Natchez a libation ceremony?
Well, actually, there's a remembrance that they actually do on behalf of Ibrahima. A few years ago marked the 175th remembrance. They all get together and they have these remembrances in Natchez. And it, I guess you would say, a pouring of libations, but I doubt if those people are actually at this stage pouring libations. So it's much more as a remembrance of him, along with the play on the bluff that they actually do as well. So you have two things that commemorate his appearance in Natchez. You have the play, and then you have the remembrance. The remembrance is supposed to be held by family members that are descendants of him that still reside in Natchez. And we do have his family tree. I just left it out of the presentation because I would have been longer and I would have been talking about other things that I really didn't want to address here. But I did want to give people an opportunity that would be interested in knowing some and filling in some of the gaps there that I left on purpose out, and to dig a little deeper into Ibrahima's life, especially you Mississippians. You know, get the book by Terry Alpha.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out because I know Natchez used to be a predominantly black town at one point in time. And now it's not. It's predominantly white now. It's and pretty racist, still pretty racist down there. But at one time, Natchez was thriving, man. It was a thriving black town at one particular.
Okay, let me let me answer something real quick for you. I can't give you the exact date of the year, man. They didn't give me the exact date of the year, but I can go back and pull the actual source and try to drop it in the comment section for you to go back for that. But Tremis, he would get to Liberia, and when they got there, coming from America to Liberia, you know, some things had happened, and a lot of people got sick in the area. And you know, that's why they, you know, now they make you get your shots and all of that stuff because your body adjusting to different changes, and all of these things are over there that you were not privy to are now taking places in these particular areas. So some people would get sick and die. He would survive long enough to make it and then transcend, and then he got sick along the way in the process. He died before the people from Morocco, who was coming down with like 10 pounds of gold dust to give him to purchase his family or whatever, or to purchase him and take him back to Morocco. However, even though he wasn't Moroccan at all, the Moroccan prince still wanted to, you know, bring him in since he was a Muslim guy. But, you know, he didn't want to do that. He wanted to get back to Timbo amongst his people and you know, do what he needed to do to reclaim kinship and then restore order in his area, and then bring his kids over. He would write them before he died about not coming here. He didn't want them to come here at some point because of the sickness, how people would get sick and die. And that's how it really ended. I didn't want to harp on it. I was gonna wait and see if somebody in the chat would ask me a question on that, because we would have been here another 2 hours. I didn't want to do all that. I wanted to give you some. I was just gonna shorten it, but it's kind of hard to shorten when you're talking about a true story. You try to condense it. It's like writing a movie, however. And you know, a lot of the information is in Terry Alpha's book, as well as Alan Huffman research, which helped me out. But hold on, somebody else said something in the chat. Oh, yeah, I answered that one. Brother Shawn, will you be participating in Sonetta's debate league? No, I am not a debater. I am merely a student, and a research. And you know, the information that I present, I do not profess to be a teacher of any means. I just only present the information as I get the information, and you can disseminate the information based on the methodology used to bring forth that information. So no, I'm not joining any debate league, man. I just present information. for our people to bring you back to your African self. Tell them, Kofi, what we doing. You know what I'm saying? So we are trying to restore traditions and culture and present that to you in a way that you would take a liking to. For some people, for other people, you do not. We do a lot of legwork. We spend a lot of money and we invest a lot of time in putting these things together. We often, me speaking for myself on this one, and other members of the Mossi, we do a lot of neglecting our family at times to bring this information forth to the people.
Yes,
And sometimes I think people don't respect that part of it, of what we actually do. So that's why we ask people to like the shows, to share the shows, to involve people in the conversations, to make suggestions, and then to actually, you know, respect our work, man, and continue to build on it. Help us build a platform up as we are trying to bring people back to the traditions and customs of our ancestors and their ways. Now, speaking of that, go back and watch Asar's presentation from last night, and then watch Ben's presentation if you have missed it. I'm saying it in that order for a reason, because Asar's going to put forth something, and then Ben's presentation is going to define these terms based on his research. So it's kind of like you get a lot of evidence there that you can lay out and come up with your own uh, solution at the end to move forward, how you want to perceive to see things dealing with these particular topics that are near and dear to a lot of us. A lot of us are really privy to these terms that have been thrown around, or the what I want to say, the thought process of what Asar is saying and what he's insinuating and so forth. Um, you know, so tell, I know you about to, you know, run real quick, man. If you want to say something real quick, you can. If not, you know what I'm saying, I know you out the door. But brother Kofi, what else you got, man?
I mean, that's it, man. I mean, for that, I like with what's going on. You know, we do the work. We put the sources out there. You know, I always say, don't believe nothing bro Kofi Price. I say, you know, we put the information out there. Then, you know, y'all go, you know, take those resources that we give and go do your own research. Don't be, you know, I know a lot of us, and I see that it hurts my feelings a lot. A lot of us is we have become too indoctrinated, and when we leave what we come out of, a lot of us come out the churches. So a lot of us comes out of the churches. We, you know, we've been indoctrinated, so we tend to believe and utter on words that people say just because they smart, sound intelligent, or sound smart, or say they a man of God, or they, you know, whatever it may be. We take those traits and we bring it over here to this so-called, and I'm calling it a so-called conscious social community, where we just following and uttering words from individual and not going back and doing no research. So please, when we present information, whether it be the Mossi, whether it be the Amirah squad, whether it be the Dagger squad, you know what I'm saying, just go back and see what we saying to be actual facts. You know what I'm saying? Don't bring that paradigm that we come out of, or just listening and believing what somebody is saying. Go do the research. We putting the information out here for you. We giving you the resources. So go back and, you know, vent these resources, and just don't take our word for it.
And to add, before I answer the other brother Kofi question in the chat, to add to that, you're absolutely right. But we have people who are speaking negatively about African cultures and traditions that are not even studied on the said subject or have ever read up on the said subject, that have only maybe watched a video and then claim it to be a religion or something like that based on the people. I'm still waiting on a video from a brother that I asked about, and that's my brother. You know what I'm saying? I love him. So that's why I respect what he's saying and how he feel, but you know, his opinion. But I am going to press him on the fact that if you ain't reading no books, if you ain't studying this culture, you can't make the comments that you're making to take the position you taking. You taking a believer's position, and if you are only listening to one particular side of the argument, even though you claim to have listened to both sides of the argument, you're being biased. Not only biased, but also personality worshiping. And yes, people who claim to be so into pressing or pushing STEM can also have a bias. Just like people who claim to be so spiritual can also have a bias. So go listen to both videos. They work very well together. The information presented by Ben and the information presented by Asar. And Asar used some sources that I have. He used some sources that I have that I could elaborate on that he did not do in his presentation, but that I can elaborate on because of the way it goes. Now, our job is to bring you some work that some people are not going to do, and that is to bring Africa to you via YouTube. So we do these presentations to bring African traditions and customs to you via YouTube, so you can have a source to go back to, and then you can vet that information if you're into methodology and go forward for that. Now, I was asked, how important is it to learn our long lost native tongue? Very important. Very important. It's important because we can go back in there and critique the misinformation that has been presented by colonizers and people who have taken on this occultist attitude and try to infuse outside traditions into the African diaspora, the African culture, and that's what I'm against. So that's why I said what I said earlier as far as that goes. Now he says, I think the debate league could be beneficial to the Mossi platform.
No, sir.
It's not. It's not beneficial to the Mossi platform at all because we present information. We go and we look for the primary sources and present information. If we're presenting information on primary sources, that it's not up for the debate. You need to scrutinize the primary sources then. Now, what we do is we present our information, and if you disagree with our information, and if we present something that you find in your research that goes against that, then we would ask you to critique our information and present your information. And if it's something that we need to adjust or correct, we will openly admit that. We're not stuck into this realm where we can't change, or because some other information changes or whatever, then we have to bow out to it or anything like that. We're going to scrutinize your sources as you're going to scrutinize our sources, and then we're going to put the information forth. If you got an argument, we're going to put the argument forth, and we're going to let the people come up with the conclusion. But we're going to take the personality out of it. So when we present the information, we want to present it in a non-biased way, and we don't take any side. It's just like all the other presentations. We show the good and the bad of Africa. In this presentation, we showed the good and the bad of Africa. We showed tribal war, differences, how they looked at each other, perceived each other, how life can change in the blink of an eye, how things worked for you one way and then worked against you in another way. This was an up and down, long road, a long road during this man's life. But debate for what? I mean, we got the Amara Squad. If they want to debate anybody, they can go see the Amara Squad, or they can go see Garfield. We got people doing that already.
Yeah, I mean, we not scared to. I mean, but it's not beneficial to us. And what I mean by it's not beneficial to us is, like I see someone put debating is great. Yeah, it's great, but it won't be beneficial to us. We not popular. We not. If you look on our pages, you look on this page. We're not getting 1,000 views. We're not getting 2,000, 3,000 views every time a video come out, no matter how many hours, how much work we put in when we present it. we is considered to be boring. Our work is not popular because we don't do the ad hominems, we don't do the bashing people. And on that well, I'm not gonna speak negative about it, but in that debate platform, it's gonna we specifically deal with good culture because we say we are African. So we understand Africans deal with building good character. So we want to continue to try to push good character. We want to continue to demonstrate that. And debating on that platform is not going to be beneficial to us because we're going to be considered boring. People are, even if we're presenting, even if our information reigns supreme than the other information, we still not going to come out on top because it's going to be who is more entertaining. So we're not entertaining. We're here just to bring the information. So that wouldn't be beneficial for the Mossi Warrior clan.
Man, look, let's just keep it just funky with you, man. We have people on the team that actually can debate. We're not afraid of debating anyone, but what we do is not what is accepted by the masses. We're not entertainers. That's just it. We just simply not entertainers. We take the scholarly approach. We stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. We scrutinize information, and we're about dropping facts and teaching people about their African culture. Now, if we make mistakes along the way and what we're doing based on what works for us, we don't mind correction. That's the thing about it. And trust me, we have talks often. We have people that disagree often, and we have, everyone plays an intricate role in what we do. So we stand on that premise, and we are the Mossi. That's why we say spears are flying and pseudos are crying. That's why when we start, we say we are at war because we are at war. And Kofi continues to tell you we are at war with our traditions and our culture and who we are as a people. It's a constant war. Somebody is always trying to remove us from who we are and who our ancestors was. They're trying to take us out of Africa and put us in places that we were not. They want us to lose our traditions and our faith for the simple-mindedness of ignorance. We have groups of people, different sects, religious and otherwise, all claiming to bash on Africa consistently. And all we're doing is combating that information with scholarship by presenting that information. Now it's up to you, the people, the viewers. If you want us to be popular, then you make us popular. But we don't care about being popular. We just care about making sure our people can grab a hold to something that reminds them of their past and move forward, and then use what they have learned from any information that we presented on our channel and utilize it in your life. Whether your kids can adapt to it, can go back and watch our videos, can go back and study and present the information, can go in school during Black History Month, and instead of talking about the same olds, they can talk about something that we have mentioned before, and then they can pull from the references and sources that we have presented and present that information to their classmates, and their classmates can learn a little something about Africa that they never knew anything about it. On that note, if we ain't got no more questions, man.
One more thing. Now, just tune in this evening, man. Tune in this evening at 6 p.m. to Kofi Pieside TV. If you hadn't subscribed, please go subscribe to that channel as well. I got one of my good brothers, Vasa Nicolo Gullo. His first presentation on the platform at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then tomorrow, tune in tomorrow at 7 p.m. We always talk about, like I said, we always try to demonstrate good character. So tomorrow, tune in tomorrow. It's going to be a discussion. It's going to be some slides. I got some slides I want to jump off first. Jump those slides off, give y'all an understanding of some working definitions, some understanding. We're going to go into the Ghana culture. We're going to go into the Nigeria culture. We're going to go into the culture of North Carolina. I mean, I'm not going to say North Carolina, but in North Africa, dealing with a few terms with them, dealing with moral ethics, moral values, and good character and character building. And then we're going to go into a discussion with some slides from my book, dealing with good character, dealing with good building. So I'm gonna have a few good brothers on the platform You know, my brother from another mother, you know, any Herit, Shawn, Khalfani is going to be on the platform. Asar M. Kai going to be on the platform. Satepara going to be on the platform. Vasa Nicolo is going to be on the platform. And I may open it up for anybody else that may want to join the platform a little later, can jump on, you know what I'm saying, and kind of discuss good character. So and it's good character, moral ethics, and moral values. That's gonna be, I think, gonna be a good thing tomorrow too. So today at 6 p.m. and then at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. That's it.
All right, one more thing, because I seen a brother in the comments say something about you should try to innovate and try to be educational and more entertaining. Don't accept that you are. No, we're not accepting that our information can be considered boring. If you know, we just realists. We're not entertainers. We ain't into cracking jokes and arguing and talking about people, throwing ad hominems and cussing up the whole storm, or trying to model ourselves in a position and sell you products and goods you're never gonna get. We ain't into those things. What we're into is who we are as a people, and that's introducing you to your history and what you got going on. I understand, bro, and I appreciate the advice, but we do what we do, and that's what worked for the Mossi. You know what I'm saying? We really, what we're doing should be considered entertaining, because it keep you from having to read all these dang on books we've been reading. You know what I'm saying? So it should be entertaining. The time that we put in presenting this information should be entertaining. You know, it should go from there. But Baba Smalls is, and heard what I say. I say Baba Smalls is very close knitted to us. We can reach out to Baba Smalls. He is who we can confide in. Now the other person that you name, Sanjeti may, deal with that person. However, but Baba Smalls, that's direct. That ain't no, that ain't no thing with that. But Baba Smalls' teaching style to many people is considered boring. His videos ain't getting 50,000 views, but you have other brothers that are on that same platform who get these high volume of views, because all they are is entertainers. We can sham you too. We can flam you if we wanted to, but that's not who we are. And we stand and fight for Africa, period, point blank. So on that note, let's rock out.
For the unity and the redemption of the African world.
Salute them honorable markers.
We were not ready to listen then.
They might not have been ready then.
As wonder whether we are ready.
Ain't no doubt about it.
To listen.
We ready, baby.
Now.
Let's go. Yeah.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
Black kiss in the sky, baby, side to side.
If the flag fly high.
Come on.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize.
Flag fly high.
Hold it high. Let it fly. Reference colors forever. Garvey would never die. On my 90, the throne ready. Let's take a ride. Cats won't fix me and don't choose a side. This is the path for the warriors. Some travel yet still vainglorious. Black power represents us. You either rolling with Africa or against us.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
Black kiss in the sky, baby, side to side.
If the flag fly high.
Come on.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
All these G's on the rise, all eyes will recognize.
Flag fly high.
The red is for the blood. I got the best stock. The rest got stood. The black is for the gods, melanated and elevated, holding the main charge. The green is for the cradle. Africa, everything first, the earth's navel. His Excellency put it together as a symbol of liberation. That's how we get the letters RBG.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
Black kiss in the sky, baby, side to side.
If the flag fly high.
Come on.
Flag fly high. Flag fly high. Flag fly high.
All these G's on the rise, all red flame. Trip stage of that black bang. Revolution in my veins. Till we free, I won't change. And you can count on that like an abacus. Celebrate the victories and the challenges. It's deeper than social media statuses. This lifestyle full of nation building practices. Yeah. A flag fly high, a flag fly high, a flag fly high. Black kisses in the sky, waving side to side. If the flag fly high, come on. Flag fly high, flag fly high, a flag fly high. RPGs on the rise, all eyes go back to down. The flag fly high, red, 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 black, 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 green, green, green. RPG, I'm about that
Red, red, red.
black, black, black.
Green, green, green.
That RPG, I'm about that red, red, red. That
Black, black, black.
that green, green, green.
RBG.
I'm about that red, red, red.
Black, black, black.
Green, green, green. That
RBG, baby.
RPG, baby.
Fly high, a flag, fly high, a flag, fly high.
Shout out to all my RPGs worldwide. Doing this thing garbage style. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Flag fly high, my flag fly high. Come on. Flag fly high, my flag fly high, my flag fly high.
Hey,
RPGs on the rise.
all eyes should recognize. Peace to everybody in the chat. Thank y'all for tuning in, man. I appreciate the love that has been shown. Like the video, share the video, thumb it down if you don't like the content. Hopefully we learned something today. And again, man, we see y'all at 6 o'clock on San Kofi channel. Peace.
Peace.